after over 80 hours of playing the Bogwarden and over 40 corrupt heart kills on Ascension 20. I think I'm ready to make a tier list of Bogwarden's cards. Notably, this tier list is specifically catered to A20H players. If you are unfamiliar with the Bogwarden, it is an excellent character mod created by Occult Pyromancer and Ocean. Do yourself a favor and check it out if you are able to. I have the standard S through D tiers set up, and you may notice there is no F tier, which is because I'm a believer that all Bogwarden cards are useful sometimes, even if those times are pretty rare for some of her cards. The cards in this list are in a randomized order, and as I go, I'll be referring to cards or mechanics that I haven't covered yet, so I'll be putting graphics on the screen to help you understand when they show up. Or you could just play the mod, and become familiar with the mechanics and cards that way. That's my recommendation. Okay, starting off with Spinning Blades. The way I see this card is that it's just a straight upgrade over the starting Snapper Trap card. In a vacuum, it does the same damage, but it does it to all enemies and scales twice with effects such as Mojo. Bogwarden can struggle in fights containing more than one enemy, and this card is sometimes a necessary pick for winning those encounters. I'll probably put it in the B tier. Nature's Wrath is another way to deal with multi-enemy encounters. There's actually a lot more relics and cards that give buffs than you'd think, so Nature's Wrath could easily hit 4 or more times pretty reliably. That said, this card is a bit niche because it's just a card that you ignore if you can only obtain 1 or 2 buffs. Also B tier. And Tingling Vines is phenomenal for a common card, especially when upgraded. This card is really good early, and actually gets better as the game goes on. It applies 2 debuffs, which shreds artifact off of enemies, and is extra strong against multi-hit attacks, such as one of the 2 attacks done by the Corrupt Heart. This is a card that you almost always want to have. I believe it's worthy of A tier. It's not going to carry you by itself, but it could be a key component of your defensive plan. Jar of Spiders is a really good pickup in Act 1 and maybe Act 2, but it falls off afterwards. A zero-cost AoE attack is nice to have in Act 1, and I'm usually happy when I see it there. B tier, and I'd say it's better than Nature's Wrath on average. Bola Toss is an insultingly bad card. 2 damage is negligible, and 2 Constricted is a really underwhelming effect. If you've seen my review of the Constrictor character, you know how dreadful Constricted and similar effects are. If you want to pick this card, you do it because Constricted is a debuff. Not a good debuff, mind you, but a debuff. And it permanently applies to enemies, which means it has a positive interaction with cards such as Sap. But like, you're almost never that desperate for debuff application on Bogwarden. She has so many better cards that do that. Straight to D tier. Camp Out gives you 2 options. One option gives you 15 temporary HP, which is very strong. And the other option might as well not even exist. You won't be drafting attack cards on Bogwarden too often, and even if you do, you have to draw this at the same time as those attack cards, which, it's slow, unreliable. Don't pick this. But 15 temporary HP is awesome. Camp Out is a card you always want to take. The question is, can you afford to take it? I'll put it in lower A tier. If you have Strange Spoon, this card shoots up to at least high A tier, because both cards exhaust and you could get so much temporary HP, but it's lower A tier by default. Many of Bogwarden's trap cards are a lot stronger if you could trigger them more than once, which is exactly what Bag and Tag lets you do. It enables burst damage, burst scaling, and it can be reused. Definitely a key component for many trap-based decks. A tier. I'll pick this up at any point in a run. Speaking of Bag and Tag, one such trap that benefits from being triggered multiple times is Vengeful Totem. I think Vengeful Totem by itself, especially if you can trigger it multiple times, can absolutely be the bulk of your defense. Vengeful Totem isn't always a card you want to take, but if it fits in a deck, it usually fits pretty well. Yet another A tier card. For a while, I thought Viper Strike was a mediocre card, but lately, my respect for it has grown a lot. Or more accurately, my respect for Venom has gone up. Venom adds at minimum 2 damage for every time you could damage the enemy. And Bogwarden can use this to burst enemies down, which is easy if she has some blasts retained, for example. Very solid common attack. B tier. Incantation has that name because I can't, and I won't, take the card. This is going straight to the depths of hell at D tier. Let's break this down, starting with Scry. Bogwarden has a few cards that allow you to Scry, which I guess is good. But the way I tend to build my decks is that I build small decks where I like most, if not all of my cards. and I usually don't want to scry too many of them away. I don't play the Watcher, but I imagine scry is more powerful on her because it allows her to line up wrath entry and exits more easily. But Bogwarden doesn't really have that desperate need to draw a conditional card during combat. My point is, I believe scry is less powerful on Bogwarden, and also, I don't like scry on a personal level. Scry is very slow, and it would compromise my speedy playstyle. Now, for the secondary effect of incantation, if I draft attacks as Bogwarden, they're probably attacks that I want to draw and play. In other words, cards that I do not want to scry. But yeah, this is just not a card that I ever want. In fact, it might just be the worst card in the mod, at least for my personal playstyle. Hilariously, the next card is Stalker, from the creators of the beloved S-tier card, Ironclad's Rampage. I would like to extend an apology to Incantation. This is my vote for worst Bogwarden card. Very slow scaling, and there's always better ways to do damage on this character. Shadow Font is a fine starter card. Blasts have plenty of synergy with Bogwarden's mechanics, such as Maledict, Mojo, and Venom. And the fact that they retain is, in my opinion, their most valuable property. Cards that create blasts are usually decent, and this is no exception. The upgrade is really good too. B tier really helps enable your early game. Plague of Toads is a bad card with fantastic synergy potential. The obvious synergy is with Venom, meaning Plague of Toads also indirectly scales with Mojo and Maledict. But the more fun synergy is with the boot. If you can get the boot early on, Plague of Toads becomes insanely good. B tier. Jinx, another starter card and a pretty good one at that. Maledict is an incredibly powerful debuff, allowing you to do usually between 3 and 5 extra damage from the other unique starter cards, Shadow Font and Snapper Trap. And that extra damage can definitely matter early on. I do find that this normally becomes less relevant later on, but it's a pretty good introduction to Maledict. Another B tier card. Broiling Flames is not great. It does deal some impressive front-loaded damage, but the burn that gets added into your hand complicates things. As I mentioned before, the way that I build my decks is that I keep them slim, so throwing an extra status card into it is more impactful. I occasionally pick Broiling Flames to get past Act 1, but I try to find another means of dealing damage. Though I do want to point out that the burn has some potential. If you don't block, the burn could deal damage to you and can trigger a trap. So that might be relevant sometimes. Anyway, I'd put this at C tier. Rabbit Punch is a great pickup in Act 1, but falls off past that. Not much to say about this one. B tier. Strikes and Defends are really bad on Bogwarden. Even in your first combat, they tend to be underwhelming because your other starter cards do damage and block well enough. Additionally, if you play a mostly skill-oriented deck, like I do on Bogwarden, Defend will become outclassed very quickly. It's still fine though, definitely better than a Strike, for sure. C tier. Cage of Serpents is basically Viper Strike as a trap. Cage of Serpents is a bit awkward because if it triggers from you getting hit by an enemy, you can't take further advantage of the venom it applies. So this is one of those cards where if you're going to take it, it needs an upgrade. This is an okay trap. I'd probably put it at a high C tier. Usually I'll just pick Viper Strike over this, but it depends. I'm always happy to add Blowpipe early on. It deals good damage, and the secondary effect is effectively card draw. Obviously, you can use this to get traps into your hand, but you can also use it to draw into curse and status cards, especially ethereal ones, because you can just exhaust them, not have to draw into them again. B tier. Any other character would be thrilled to add a Night Terror into their deck, but Bogwarden? Not usually. On a character where skills shine more than attacks, you can't take advantage of Vulnerable as much. If this isn't a rare card reward after a boss and I'm not interested in any of the options, I'll usually just skip. That said, it's great in Act 1, but you're not likely to see it in Act 1. C tier. Acid Cloud is many things, including a mass debuff, AoE offense, and AoE defense. Excellent way to apply Venom. I pick this card almost every time I see it. It just kind of fits into any kind of Bogwarden deck. A tier. Pressure Plate is a super fun card that you can absolutely build around. If you have Incarcerate, it becomes a beast. The only problem is that it doesn't do well in multi-enemy fights, so you're probably going to want another solution for those. But it definitely destroys individual targets. It's niche, but it's a very, very powerful niche. B tier. Dark Pact is good in theory. In practice, not so much. Bogwarden usually struggles to draw cards, which makes low-impact zero-cost cards more difficult to justify. It has its uses, but the vast majority of the time I just find myself skipping it. If you have artifact generation, it's obviously much better, but I'll put it in C tier. Ah, here we go. Our first S tier card. Refined Blast is an excellent source of card draw, especially because it retains. I'd recommend seeing this card not as draw 2 cards, but rather, on any turn you want, draw 2 cards. It's free, so there's basically zero downside to adding this into your deck. It also does direct HP loss to enemies, which helps cheese the annoying enemy known as Spheric Guardian. Attunement is really good. Oftentimes you will want just a few points of mojo to enable your win condition, and this lets you have it. A tier. Strike. D tier. Bramble Shield is not a card I pick often, though it excels in very specific situations, such as if you have Artifact or if you're running a deck where Briar Patch is a primary damage source. Usually though, it's just a skip. C tier. Hurl is my vote for most fun Bogwarden card, especially upgraded. But is it actually good? Usually, yes. It helps you burst down a specific enemy, which is invaluable in multi-enemy encounters. Particularly if you have Pressure Plate in your deck, you want to have as many hurls as possible. A tier. Shank is a respectable Act 1 damage card, but it's super annoying that it discards your rightmost card. Shadow Font adds a blast to the right of your hand, Blowpipe adds cards to the right of your hand, etc. Realistically though, the downside isn't that bad, as you have some control over which card gets discarded. I'd say it's C tier. Stickerbush Strike is an excellent source of spines. It helps deal some essential passive damage early on, and if you have a Briar Patch in your deck, this can increase the damage it deals. Good card, but not something you necessarily always want. B tier. Submerge is probably the card I sleep on the most. 12 block is a lot for 1 energy, but I typically have other ways to block, and the Void scares me, because I run small decks, which increases my odds of drawing into it. As I mentioned, Bogwarden struggles with draw, so status cards are a bit more impactful. I skip this card on my own accord, but when I transform a card into Submerge, it usually does well. It probably deserves B tier, but I'm going to put it in C tier. Okay, Boulder Trap is only good if you have a Bag and Tag or Incarcerate in your deck. Otherwise, it's a dead draw the first time you draw it. You'll need multiple deck cycles to even play this once. Boulder Trap isn't the worst trap card in the mod, but it's definitely down there. The only reason it's not D tier is because when it works decently well. Eagle Eyes. Okay, look, I don't like the scry mechanic very much, but when this card sometimes says gain 10 block, scry 10 cards for 1 energy, you can't argue with that value. Might deserve A tier, I'm putting it in B tier. Geyser is just Shadow Font if it was an attack. This card is okay. I'll put it in the same tier as Shadow Font, but lower down. Snapper Trap is an excellent source of damage early on. You probably noticed on Ascension 20 that many enemies will give you chip damage, which is perfect for triggering traps. That said, it often becomes irrelevant past Act 1 unless you have Bag and Tag and or Incarcerate, but for what it does early on, I respect it. B tier. Wild Magic is a great card if you think a loop, rushdown, and a dropkick will improve your situation. Which is never. Too much RNG involved in this card. But it excels in some situations, such as if you have Dead Branch or in the Hexaghost/Slime boss fight, as you can get rid of the burns and slimes. C tier. Spiteful Staff, when upgraded, is not only the best source of Maledict that Bogwarden has access to, but also the best source of Venom. This card is awesome. Either Maledict or Venom, if not both, are going to be very relevant for your damage plan. Super reliable and easily deserves S tier. Sludge Bomb is basically AoE Disarm, and Disarm is universally a pretty great card. Don't forget the HP loss as well, that can absolutely be relevant. A tier. I almost always want this card in my deck, even if I'm not running a trap-based build. I think Incarcerate is the absolute best Bogwarden card. The amount of burst damage and burst scaling that Incarcerate enables is ridiculous. It's so good that even if your only trap is Snapper Trap, I would consider adding this to your deck. Survey is unconditional card draw, which Bogwarden lacks, and reliable defense since you'll probably have mostly skills in your deck if you play on A20. A tier. Warding Totem is a very interesting card. At first I brushed it off and rarely picked it, but then I started to realize how valuable it is, especially when upgraded. The artifact lets you gain 2 permanent mojo if gained before turn 3, thanks to Bogwarden's Starter Relic, and Artifact just goes well with several Bogwarden cards, such as Dark Pact and Spiritual Journey. The plated armor is excellent too. The more plated armor you can get, the better, which is why I recommend pairing this with Bushwhack for some consistent defense. This card does absolutely hilarious things when paired with Incarcerate too. Anyway, I'd put this at A tier. Hair Trigger has so many positives for a zero cost card. It does damage, causes you to lose a small amount of HP, which isn't a bad thing most of the time, and it's card draw, which Bogwarden very much appreciates. Very deserving for high A tier. Hair Trigger won't carry you by itself, but it's just nice to have. Between Maledict, Venom, Snared, Weak, and more, you can very reliably apply many debuffs to enemies as Bogwarden, which means Sap can grant you a lot of energy. The problem is that you often can't spend that energy thanks to Bogwarden's relatively low amount of card draw. Sap is S tier if you have Runic Pyramid, otherwise I'd put it at low B tier. There are very few times where Bide Time is not welcome in my deck. Even with zero support, this card is great. Bogwarden is often about blocking until you can deal burst damage to enemies, and Bide Time is possibly the best way to stall until the burst damage happens. Notably, it has a fantastic upgrade and is probably the best use of the extra block given by Tripwire. Easy S tier. Ritual Totem isn't always a card you want to add, but has its uses for sure. If you can upgrade it and pair it with Bag and Tag, it can be a substantial heal, as well as a bit of mojo if you are unable to find Attunement or other cider form. I respect it. B tier. If you are using traditional block methods, such as with Bide Time or Survey, Tripwire will amplify your defense to high heaven. Like many Bogwarden cards, this is situational, but very powerful when it works. B tier. For Flock of Bats, the block portion isn't the relevant part, as it's barely better than a base defend, but the secondary effect can be good. It's a valid early game enter to fights such as the 5 Slimes if you don't have any AoE yet. I wouldn't ever pick this after Act 1, but it's alright. C tier. I see Sinister Ritual as a card that tries to be a direct competitor to Hair Trigger, but fails in a few ways. Sinister Ritual has more upfront HP loss, it costs more, and doesn't have immediate effects such as card draw or damage. It's true that this card is a net heal, but like many cards in this game, it's situational. Sometimes when you trigger a trap, the combat ends, so you never get the heal that would have happened next turn. Or sometimes you'll draw this without a trap in hand and it's just a mediocre healing source. That said, it's still good. I'm just harsh on it because I see Hair Trigger as a better version of Sinister Ritual. Another addition to the B tier. Walkabout is card draw, but with the condition that you must discard cards. I think I underrate this card, and I personally never pick it because, as I stated before, I don't really like Scry. Especially when playing Bogwarden where I like all of my cards. I'll put it at the bottom of B tier. Lineup is a Scry card I can get behind. I think the main value of this is lining up those fantastic X cost cards and getting some more energy to use on them, especially if lineup is upgraded. I wouldn't take it if I don't have at least 2 X cost cards or Runic Pyramid though. B tier. Dark Vision is another Scry card that I respect. As a 2-cost power, it has kind of a high upfront cost, but can be great for discarding burns in fights such as Shield and Spear and Hexaghost. And you get rewarded with energy if you do it as well. I hate to stack the B tier so heavily, but yeah, this is another B tier card for me. Portents is the only D tier power card in this mod. You probably won't scry nearly often enough for this to be useful. Although it has its uses if you can, for example, get multiple copies of it in the deck, as well as multiple copies of Dark Vision and Walkabout. Good luck blocking against the Awakened one if you're running that as your block strategy though. Blunderbuss is a nice addition to the deck if you are in Act 1. It often ends up being at least 15 or 18 damage much of the time, which instantly kills a Louse or maybe even a Fungi Beast. It's an okay card, though I think I slightly prefer Shank over this. The Rumble is not a card you actively seek, it's a card that just kind of ends up in your deck because it's usually necessary for elite fights. Specifically in elite fights, the Rumble offers stellar AoE damage for a 1-cost card, and it's relevant in every act except for Act 4. In regular hallway fights though, it's pretty bad. High B tier. I think its ability to take down elites so you can get relics makes it a valuable addition to the deck overall. Urticating Spines is one of those cards that needs an upgrade, but if you can get an upgrade on it, it's very good. Excellent pairing with some other great cards such as Briar Patch or Bide Time. B tier. Implode is amazing. The fact that an enemy gains block isn't nearly as important as the fact that it's 12 block for 1 energy for yourself, as well as the ability to keep the block until your next turn. Implode is extra good if you have plated armor, or if you can get a Bide Time in your deck, but even by itself, this is a very solid block card. A tier. You can apply so many debuffs as the Bogwarden that Bewitch often ends up giving you a ton of block. Really good card overall. Definitely pick this up if you have an Entangling Vines, Spiteful Staff, or Acid Cloud in your deck. Bewitch can honestly be a core block solution at times, more so if you have multiple copies of it. A tier. Look, there are multiple ways to manually trigger traps as Bogwarden, and those cards that trigger traps often do so with multiple effects. Snip, even if it does retain and cost 0, is not it. You won't ever need this card. I will sometimes pick this if I have Runic Pyramid and a Bag and Tag or Incarcerate in my deck, so I can pick a trap to play multiple times, but that's pretty rare. D tier. Vile Powder often replaces Jinx's role in the late game for me. It's some block and plenty of indirect damage in one card. Pairs well with Bewitch too. B tier. Building around Bushwhack is one of my favorite ways to play Bogwarden. If you can get multiple upgraded copies of Bushwhack, your plated armor generation becomes out of control. Plated armor is an incredibly valuable buff to have, and the more copies of Bushwhack you add, the better. However, you do have to be wary of having too much defense in the deck if you add several Bushwhacks early on. So for that reason, I would recommend removing defense before strikes if you're picking Bushwhacks. Easy A tier, love this card. The Rumble is like Unstable Concoction at home. Unstable Concoction is the superior Elite Destroyer, and it has synergy with powerful relics such as Toy Ornithopter and Potion Belt, which allow you to keep the benefit of Unstable Concoction for another fight entirely. Notably, potions are affected by Mojo and Maledict, which lets you burst down enemies even easier. A tier. Blending In is just outclassed by Implode. I find that it never works because I usually want to have some attacks in my deck, such as Incarcerate or a Spiteful Staff, so this power just doesn't do anything. I know I said Portents was the only D tier power in this mod. I'm sorry to say that I lied to you. This goes to very high D tier. It can be useful, but usually just isn't. Briar Patch, if you have multiple copies of it or the ability to generate lots of spines, can actually be a damage solution for your deck. It's just tricky because to make it work you have to draw and play a lot of cards first, so it's not what I'd recommend building your deck around, but it's certainly doable. Briar Patch offers consistent damage output and shreds enemies who attack multiple times. Pretty good card, I'd put it in A tier. Death Ward synergizes very well with Mojo, Maledict, and Venom. Honestly, I think this is just a better passive damage power than Briar Patch most of the time, and I'm always happy to see it if I have just a small amount of Mojo generation. Even if I don't have any Mojo, I'll pick this up in Act 1 because the base damage isn't too shabby. High A tier, fantastic card. If you enjoy walking into a boss fight and having more max HP than the boss you're fighting, Spiritual Journey might be of interest to you. With just one copy of this, you could very consistently get your max HP to at least triple digits by the end of the game. The downside isn't that bad because, at least for me, I find myself not having too many attacks in my deck as Bogwarden. And even if you never net max HP with this card because you keep playing attacks, you still get the heal from playing Spiritual Journey in the first place, which means this card almost always has some value. Ridiculously overpowered card, and not putting this at the very top of S tier might be my hottest take in the video, because this card is notoriously good, but I personally think Incarcerate slightly edges it out. We had a card that gives you max HP, what about a card that makes you lose max HP? Not only is Friends something I don't have, but it's a Bogwarden card that gives you some buffer and intangible for 1 energy, and that alone is extremely high value. And the downside of losing max HP might not even happen if the fight is over before 2 more turns have passed. Or you could just negate the downside with Artifact. Or you could just lose the max HP because it's worth it for the wild upfront defense. S tier. Cruel Schemes can give you consistent block as long as you're constantly drawing traps or making blasts. This is a pretty decent block solution but requires specific circumstances to make it work. And having this in the deck makes me even more terrified of the Awakened one, who I struggle against with Bogwarden. Low B tier for me. Poison Nova is a cool card, but I just don't find myself generating enough blast to ever make this worth picking up. It's a fun card, but just not a very good one, unfortunately. I'm sure it could work in some decks, I just haven't found one where it does. I'll put it at the bottom of C tier. Lasso Up goes hard. This card excels in boss and elite fights in particular, thanks to the big game keyword. Notably, there are only 2 bosses in the game who don't have multi-hit attacks, so Snared is extremely valuable. High A tier. Watch and Learn I find is usually outclassed by Bag and Tag or Incarcerate, but it's certainly pickable. It's a great pick if you've added multiple traps to your deck and can't find a way to trigger them quickly. I'll put it at B tier. Restless Spirits is Bogwarden's equivalent of Infinite Blades, except Restless Spirits is actually good. It's slow but decent damage that excels in Act 1 in particular. Emphasis on the slow portion of that last sentence though. I often find that decks that rely on Restless Spirits don't deal enough front-loaded damage to survive. I'll still give it B tier though. Other Cider form is very expensive, but very powerful. Playing a copy of this lets otherwise average traps become win conditions. Mojo usually pairs very well with many Bogwarden cards, so this should usually be a consideration. If you can play Other Cider form reliably, it can carry you to victory. A tier. Corpse Flies might be the most situational Bogwarden card. The upgraded version is basically free damage, and can trigger Venom as well as relics such as Shuriken, Kunai, and Ornamental Fan. The problem is getting the upgraded version. The unupgraded version is just a mediocre zero-cost attack that becomes upgraded if you can kill an enemy with it. Oftentimes though, you can't afford to have a bad card like unupgraded Corpse Flies be in your deck. So it really depends. Also, if you have Molten Egg, this becomes an excellent card, because you can gather many upgraded versions of Corpse Flies quickly, which is a nice way to scale. I'll put this in C tier, not usually good, but when it's good, it's good. Hoodwink is similar to Plague of Toads, but offers more damage and more hits, sometimes. It's the only card that has the Snecko keyword, which means it's unreliable. I'd say Hoodwink is a better early game card, but Plague of Toads is better later. Low B tier for me. And finally, Snare Trap. More like Snore Trap. D tier. There are much better ways to apply Snared, and those other ways let you choose which enemy gets snared, unlike Snare Trap. I might consider this card if I have lots of draw and copies of Watch and Learn, which might happen if I pick Snecko Eye for instance, but that's about it. Okay, we're done! If you've played Bogwarden, please let me know your thoughts on the tier list, and if you haven't played Bogwarden, play Bogwarden. Also, real quick, I've made a booster pack for each Slay the Spire mod I've covered on this channel, so I'd like to keep that tradition going. I've created Bogwarden's Swamp Stash, which adds some interesting new relics to Bogwarden's relic pool, as well as Bogwarden-themed achievements to work towards. If you want to play with the booster pack, you can download Bundle of Boosters, which contains all of my other booster packs. If you've watched this far, seriously, thank you so much, and any feedback you have, I would like to hear it. Goodbye.